Hey everybody, Birdie here, and I am getting ready to uh, craft with you on our November box. So I've got all my supplies ready. If you haven't watched the unboxing and supply video, go watch that. It talks about all the things that you're going to need for this craft. You also have that in your handout as well. And so let's get started. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to prep our pieces. And really when I prep, I'm just using masking tape to tape down all my pieces. So what I do is I take a piece of masking tape and I lay it sticky side up, and then I'm going to take my little letters and little pieces and attach them to my tape. This acts as a tray. It acts as a second set of hands to help me hold the pieces as I paint them. So I'm going to just go through and tape all my pieces. The other thing I like to think about when I'm taping my pieces is I put them in the order of which I would read them. That way I ensure I'm painting the right side of the letter. Also, just take a look at the score marks. If you're unsure, like say for the W, it could really go either way. You know, it looks like a W both ways, but there is one side of that W that's a little bit wider than the other side. So if you're unsure, just set it on the base where the score mark is, and if it covers it up well, then you know you're good. If you have it flipped around backwards, you'll see some of those score marks pop through. So use that as a guide. Also, your protective block can help figure out which side to paint. And then I also like to try and keep my colors separate. So if I'm going to paint something red, like my peppermint swirls, I'll put those all on a piece of tape. And so for like the trees, I'll put those on a separate piece because they're going to be brown like a cookie. So just a couple tips there. So let's get everything taped and then we'll get started painting. Okay, so everything's taped. I do just want to mention that I mentioned this in the unboxing, but I'm going to mention it again. Part of Santa's has the apostrophe here between the A and the S. Now, normally I don't have this floating, and I usually just leave it out of the cut because it's such a small piece that it can be easily lost, broken. It's hard to grab and paint and glue on, but I missed that in the design and it cut them for you guys anyways. Usually I'll just go through and paint a little apostrophe here, but you do have it. It is the tiny littlest piece, and you're welcome to give it a try and see, paint it and tape it on. Just be aware it is in there, so keep your eye out for it if you want. If you lose it, if it breaks because it's so tiny, you can just paint that little apostrophe, paint everything the base color and then come back and paint that black or whatever color your letters are. And that's typically what I do. Again, it was a miscut on my end. I usually don't include it because it's such a finicky piece and can be super frustrating. So, but I want you to know it's there. All right, so we've got everything taped. So now we're ready to do the second step. Okay, so part 2 is just painting our base. So I'm going to start painting our pieces. I like to start by painting the biggest piece first. That way it has time to dry while I'm painting everything else. And then I come back with the second coat on everything. So I am going to paint my base white. Now, white is a super light color. It's not as pigmented as some of the other colors. So typically you're going to need a couple coats, at least 2, probably 3, maybe 3, kind of just depends. Let's see if I can get mine to unclog here. Got a little clog going on. There we go. So keep that in mind as you're painting. You always want to do light coats. You want to go with light coats, multiple light coats, because you'll get a smoother finish and it will dry faster. Acrylic paint dries super fast, so it might seem like extra steps to do multiple coats, but it dries so fast, especially when you do light coats, that it doesn't really take that much time, and you'll be a lot happier with the results of it. The other thing I want to take note of is that wood is super porous, so it's important to have fluid paint. You don't want it to have sat on your tray for an extended amount of time and getting tacky, because you'll have a hard time pushing it around. So for this big surface, I'm going to use a larger brush, something like this. This is a 1.5. This works too. This is, I think, maybe a 1, or even something just like a black sponge brush works great. So when you're painting your base coat on these bigger pieces, you do want to add just a little bit of water to your brush. It will help that paint flow. You can also use like a little squirt bottle and just squirt some water right on your paint and water it down just a little bit. You don't want to have so much water that the paint is dripping off your brush, because, well, wood and water don't mix, and we don't want to oversaturate the wood, causing it to bubble and kind of fall apart, okay? Because this is plywood, and it does, doesn't like water. No wood does. So just a quick little dip in that water, or my water cup. Then I'm going to grab some paint and just push that paint around. So when we're doing light coats, this first coat is going to act like a primer coat. It's getting that wood ready, and it's going to look super splotchy, and that's okay. It's what we want. So I'm going to get some more water, grab a paint, and as I'm brushing that water and that paint mix, and it just makes it easier to push that around. The other thing is I like to keep my edges nice and dark from the laser cut. So when I'm painting, I try to start my brush in the inside and pull to the out. I don't start, let me get back in frame here. I forget how big this thing is. I don't start up here and pull, because what that's going to do is it's going to deposit a bunch of paint on my edge, and I want to keep those clean. So start inside your piece and push to the outside. So as I go this way, and I just keep pulling that paint up and off the edge. I don't start out here and pull down. And then same as the bottom, I'm going to start inside my piece and pull to the outside. Do that on the edge. Now, if you accidentally get paint on the edge, which I do all the time, it's not a big deal. You can use your baby wipe. If you catch it while it's wet, use your baby wipes or a wet rag to wipe away the paint. And if you don't catch it while it's wet, you can use a sandpaper and sand it away. Or you can use some black paint to, clean it up and cover the white. The other thing I want to mention is that this board is scored with the outline. We talk about that in the unboxing. The score marks are fairly deep into the wood, so you can paint right over those score marks and we'll still be able to see the placement of our items. If you want to do something different and place your items in different locations, then you can definitely use the back of the board, which is a blank slate. So that's what I love about these kits. It offers you that flexibility to kind of play with location and placement of your items, or if you want to just go with what we have, you can do that too. Okay, so you can see how terrible that looks. Very splotchy. That's okay. That second coat is gonna really clean this up and it's gonna give me a nice smooth finish. So we're gonna set this aside and let it dry and move on to the next pieces. So the next pieces are just our small little pieces and our frame and the gingerbread house. For those, I am going to use a makeup wedge. And so I'm going to start with the frame here, and I'll explain how to use the makeup wedge, and then we will just go through and paint everything and kind of speed the video up. I'm using that flamenco red. And what I like to do for the makeup wedge, again, because I like to keep my edges nice and dark, I am just painting the top. I don't want to have any paint on the edges. The makeup wedge is perfect for this. And you'll also notice that my makeup wedge is kind of small. I have a bunch of small ones here. Let me pull out an original one here. So typically your makeup wedge is going to look like this. It's fairly fat. I cut mine in half, so I have multiple applicators. Because this surface is so big and our pieces are so small, it's kind of a waste. So feel free to cut your makeup wedge down to the size that you want. All right, so I'm going to load my makeup wedge up, dipping it right into my pile of paint, and then you want to offload. You can just simply squeegee it off, kind of push off the paint, or you can do a little tap tap in a clean area on your palette. But now I have no globs of paint. That makeup wedge has soaked up that paint, and now we're ready to paint our colors. So let's just start with the peppermint swirls. I'm just going to tap tap with a medium to light pressure, and that paint is going to come off beautifully on the top of the surface without getting any paint on the bottom. So again, load up your piece and then offload it. Squeegee it, push off the pieces or tap tap, and then we're just going to come out here and tap tap on our pieces. And you can get fairly far. These makeup wedges hold quite a bit. And I'm just holding the tape down with my finger. This tape makes it super easy to paint your pieces, so you're not trying to hold them and get a bunch of paint on your fingers. These little pieces get hard to hold. It's just an extra set of hands. And there we are. Okay? So we're going to put our first coat on everything, and then we'll come back with our second coat. Okay, so we've got our first coat done. So the next step is to do our second coat. So we just start from the beginning, start wherever, the first piece was. For me, it was my large flat. And we're going to go through and put a second coat on. Now, I do want to make a quick note that sometimes when we paint something, it makes our wood feel rough, simply because when wood gets wet, the fibers expand, and so it can start to feel rough. Those little tiny fibers stick up, and that's what that rough feeling is. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. It just kind of depends on the manufacturing of the wood, and all the conditions involved there. And sometimes you'll feel like there's an area that's rough and there's an area that's not. So between coat 1 and coat 2, I always like to just feel my surface and see if it needs a quick sanding or smoothing out. So if it does, I just take a fine grit sandpaper, 220, 3 something, 400, whatever you have, and then I'll just lightly go over the surface, not rough to the point where I'm removing a bunch of paint. It's just a really light sanding, and you'll start to feel it smooth out and those fibers are knocked down. So I'm going to do that real quick with my base, just because I can feel it's kind of rough. I go through, feel. You can see I did remove a little bit of paint. There's some of that white dust left over. There's a little bit on my block here. So I'll wipe that down, and then we'll get started with our second coat. All right, so I am going to put my second coat on everything just like we did the first coat and get a nice clean finish. Okay, so we have put our second coat on everything. At this point, you want to just take a look at your pieces and see if you need a third coat. Remember, if you're using any light colors like white, yellow, oranges, obviously probably not this trip or this project, but those colors are very low pigmented and sometimes can take a third coat to get a nice clean finish. So for me, if you want to do any distressing to your background, this would be the time to do it before we start gluing things on. Maybe you want to sand some of the white off and add some dry brush techniques just to give it a worn sign look. You would do that now. The other thing that you want to do before you start gluing, which is going to be our next step, is adding the outline around the cookies and the candy cake part. So I didn't include a frame here because I wanted to be able to paint it on and just look like a hand-painted sign. So a couple different things you can do here. You can use just a detail brush, something small with a small round, or you can use a paint pen. If you had like an acrylic paint pen in the color of your choice, black, brown, gold. Gold would be really pretty to add some gold accents to this sign. You could do that too. So I'm going to paint my a little frame around that black right now. When you're working in small areas or detail lines like this, you want to make sure that your paint is fluid and not tacky. Acrylic paint dries super fast, and if it's tacky, it's going to be so much harder to do detail work. And as you're putting in your straight line here, try to do long, fairly quick brush strokes. And move with your arm like this. So as I'm going, I'm moving my whole arm. I'm not just doing little brush strokes with my wrist. So you can get a better stroke if you just move your entire arm. It's a more steady brush stroke as opposed to just using your wrist can be super shaky. And don't be afraid to rest your hand on your surface. If you're up like this, you'll get more shaky. Having the ability to rest your hand when you're painting long lines is super helpful because our hands are heavy and our arms will get tired. The other thing you could do is just paint the entire inside of this little bottom label and not frame it and just paint the entire inside a color. And that would really kind of change up the sign, giving it some more texture and dimension. If it was a really bold statement, like if you painted the entire thing inside to black with your brown letters, or maybe you used white or red, but that's another option as well. Okay, so now that that's done, we are going to assemble the sign before I do any detail work. I think at the very beginning I said our steps would be tape, base coat, second coat, distress, detail, and then assemble. But because this sign has so many moving parts, I want to put it all together, and then I'll come in with my detail lines and fun little accent pieces. So what we're going to do is start by gluing down our pieces. You can use any glue that you want. I'm going to use a wood glue today. Just remember that it needs to be a clear drying glue. For these small skinny pieces like this frame, I like to just put a couple drops here and there, and then I move that around with my fingers, just kind of tapping that glue around to get all the pieces. If you're using a super glue, don't use your fingers to move anything around. You don't want to have a frame stuck to your fingers. That stuff is not as forgiving as other glue. Just take care. You can also apply it with a brush or a makeup wedge. Put some glue on your palette. And grab a little brush. Just make sure that you wash your brush. Don't maybe use your best brush to apply glue with. I like to have some like dollar store brushes around for that purpose if I ever want to use glue Mod Podge, that type of thing. I kind of have a set of cheap brushes specifically for that, so if they get ruined, I'm not, you know, super upset about it. Okay. So we've got that down. Now remember, this piece can be kind of wonky and wobbly on your wood, so just make sure that you give it time to set up. Now the score marks that you see are the outside of the frame. Keep that in mind. So you want to line your score marks to the out here and the out there, and then you'll be good to go. So the best thing that I can say for this piece, if it's, you know, wobbly and wonky, is to have some clamps to help hold it down, or some heavy books, just to get it so that glue sets up. Now, if you're using a super glue, just holding it for 10 seconds is probably fine. This glue is fairly fast drying. It's the Super Glue brand, and you can get this at the dollar store. It's actually one of my favorite glues. I usually use a super glue, a CA big bottle that I get off Amazon, and I'm out of it. And this is my second go-to. There we go. All right, so let me pull all my pieces out. The other technique I want to show you real quick is kind of a pool or bath method, I guess you could call it. You can get just a plate or piece of plasticky, whatever. I just have this wax paper I use, and I'm going to put some glue on it. And what I can do is I'm going to start at the bottom here, and I'm going to grab my cookies, and you can just tap in this pool. This is more for the little letters. I'm going to just use my fingers for this big one, actually. These little guys, it's hard to get a small amount of paint, especially if you're using something that has a larger applicator. And as you're taking your pieces off your tape, do take care to do it gently. It's easier to hold the piece and pull the tape off the back than it is to try and pull this off the tape, if that makes sense. They just break a little more easier. So let me show you. So instead of trying to lift this up, I always flip it over and just pull the tape away at an angle. And that seems to work just a little bit better. It keeps the piece from being bent, possibly when you're lifting it up off there. Okay, so here, now that we're at this smaller area here, let me show you this method that's a little easier for these little guys. So I've got this little tube, and I'm literally just going to drop it in this pool of paint, and then I can tap on a different spot, kind of offloading it, right? We don't want to have too much glue. But that is a super easy way to get glue on these little pieces, is to just use this little bath method, I guess. Pool method. Dip, whatever you want to call it. Dip it in there, and then tap off the excess, and then onto your piece. All right, so I am gonna get everything glued down and then we will get to adding some fun details. So everything's been glued down now, and we could be done here. But I like to add just some detail lines just to help things pop a little bit, add some whimsical dots here and there. And this is where that fun bottle comes in, where we can paint with this bottle. So I've got one filled with white paint. Um, you should be able to just, it's got a small opening, but if you're careful with your paint bottles, should be able to fill it fairly easy. And it doesn't have to be white. You can use any color. If you were going with a pinks and mint colored sign, you might want to have a pink in here or something. That would be really pretty. I had a hard time deciding colors. It's always the hardest part for me to decide colors. I just want to try everything in all the colors. But let's just take a look at how this works. So I'm going to hold up my little gingerbread man here. I've got this filled with paint, and hopefully I can do it standing up here. But you just give it a little squeeze. You might want to practice on a piece of paper, but it really does act like a little paint pen, and it also gives just a little bit of dimension on your paint. It kind of has a little bit of a ridge, kind of like frosting. So I'm going to go through and kind of decorate my cookies. And if you get it clogged up at the top here, it's full of paint and it's not coming out, I just take a baby wipe and wipe it away every once in a while. Just a gentle squeeze, take your time, but it's kind of fun to do something just a little bit different from just a paintbrush. Now, if you're not comfortable with the bottle, then you can also use a paint pen. If you have a white one or any color you want, you can use the liner brush if that's what you prefer. But let's just show you that there. Just allows you to get some pretty thin decorative lines going on. Now I didn't do anything super fancy on my gingerbread man, but you could do some fun swirls. I'm going to add some dots to my black letters because I love the look of just having some dots here and there. Kind of on the bigger parts of those little swishes, or the ends of them, I should say. Super fun, just to add some whimsical bits. I added centers to my peppermints, and so we can just kind of go through and maybe we want to outline this heart here. Maybe outline the doorknob. Okay. You can add maybe some highlights in your peppermint stick sides. Okay. Let's add just a swirl going up. And then maybe a couple dots. So you can get really decorative with the cookie parts. I'm going to flip it around so I can get to this tree. I'm going to outline the tree first, kind of following that score mark. And then maybe I'll just add some swirls inside here. At a bottom. I love the looks of gingerbread cookies when they're decorated with the pretty swirly frosting. But I do not like eating gingerbread cookies. I do not like that flavor of the ginger and the all that. All right, so let's just add some swirls to our other tree here so they match. That one kind of got a little wonky, but that's all right. I think I'm gonna leave the star open. Let's add some dots to our center here. And add dots to there. There we go. So give the little bottle a try. You can also, if you don't want to use it on your sign, that was kind of the reason I gave you these cookies. They're a little bit bigger, so you can play with some maybe bigger designs. Some of these smaller cookies, even with that fine tip, can get a little cumbersome to get a good shape or, you know, a good swirl or whatever it is you want. But that was what the purpose with these, so that you could really play around with this brush and get some really cool looking frosting looks. The other thing that you could do with the either this or the ornaments is adding just a little bit of glitter or snow, or, you know, more of that chunky snow, so it looks like maybe sugar. I thought that would be fun too. So I'm going to grab my black liner brush, or my liner brush here, with a little bit of black, and just bring in some line work around the snowy bits on top here. With my white background, I really want this to stand out, that there's a snowy roof there. I'm going to also bring a line down here, maybe at the bottom. There we go. And that just helps add a little to our gingerbread house. So there we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed this month's craft. I'm excited to see what you guys do with it, whether you go traditional colors, whether you go soft pastels, greens. I just love seeing all of your guys' creations. It's just so amazing. So make sure to share a picture in the group. If you're not comfortable sharing a picture, you're more than welcome to email me or message me. I have a couple ladies who we just message back and forth, and they share pictures of their crafty goodness, and it's just so fun to visit with others who share the love of crafting. So I love that. So go ahead and message me if you're not comfortable sharing in the group. Other than that, I am going to let you guys go. And I'm excited to show you next month's craft. I know, you're probably like, I haven't even got this one done, but it's always such a fun process once this one's done to do a new one for me anyways. So anyways, I will let you go. You guys have a great rest of the month and happy crafting.